Chapter 1 of Tales and Truths from the Southernmost Point, the Spaniard. In memory of an islander, and prior to the telling of my tale, I would like to address famous events and other comments about what took place in Key West around the turn of the century and early 1900s. I am giving details of the story as it was told to me. Please know that any misinformation is unintentional. This writing is me making a point about a very hateful world that I long would change. This is my part in favor of that change. Evil in the world as we know it today is unbearable, and there are things and attitudes or beliefs that make it worse. If we can only see truth through fresh eyes, notwithstanding the event I write of involves stories I heard from my grandmother about the lynching of Manuel El Isleño Cabezas and the attack of his life by the Ku Klux Klan. This is a tragic true story of hatred and where it can lead. It is also a famous story from the early 1900s, and many generations have heard it over and over again. My grandparents were very young and starting their own families at the time. My parents had not even been born when it occurred. But it is my understanding that my maternal great-grandfather was a friend of Cabezas, and what happened to him hit the heart and soul of many conchs. What happened to his friend actually caused my great-grandfather to flee to the only island that he could go, Cuba. My grandmother never saw her father again, and he died suddenly from cancer. My mother said she quietly and pathetically wept for days while continuing in her daily chores. It broke my maternal grandmother's heart, and the telling of that tale broke mine too. The hatred bestowed on my great-grandfather's friend bitterly touched all around him and within his circle of influence. This kind of evil touches everyone. The islander, in Spanish, means El Isleño, and he was born in Key West and even fought bravely in World War I. Why was he hunted down and killed like an animal? Despite this, he fought back until they finally killed him. Why did he fight back against those who preyed upon him? His love for a multiracial woman. At the time and still today, they are familiarly known and referred to by many as mulattoes. These people are the children that come from the union of a white parent and a black parent. El Isleño loved and lived with this woman, and because of that, members of the hate group sought him out, tarred and feathered him, eventually hung and shot him. His father pursued the ones that were meaning to kill his son, but he was too late. One of the darkest sides of the history of the southernmost point was that hatred, prejudice, and bigotry. They were very prevalent. Not everyone from the island agreed with this mentality, but many did. Still, there are those that fought against it, like El Isleño. Another story I was told about involving good and honorable men that I believed in equality was the Honorable James Dean, who is said to be the first black judge to be admitted to the judicial office in 1988, after slavery was abolished in the South. Judge Dean was yanked from his office as a Monroe County judge in Key West after being accused of performing a marriage ceremony for an interracial couple. Unfortunately, Judge Dean died a pauper because of his removal and never saw the day where he would be honored and his office restored. A tragic end for a man who believed in equality and believed that if a man and a woman loved each other, they should be allowed to be legally wed. The Bible speaks of many tribes and peoples, but basically only describes one race, the human race, mankind. This writer wishes to tell this tale depicting a story of a man and a woman who fell in love and decided to marry and raise a family. Hatred must stop. We must evolve and yet go back to the knowledge of creation and know that mankind was created in God's image. The two greatest of all commandments are love God and love others. The Spaniard had a full head of hot white hair. His skin was bronzed from the sun, and his eyes were green. He wasn't very tall, but his character made him a giant. The Spaniard had been highly successful for many years in the running of his business, which involved the transport and sale of liquor, silver, and later tobacco between Spain, Cuba, and Key West. He had acquired the tobacco transacting business as he traveled more frequently to Havana from his home off the Spanish coast. It is not particularly important to know where he was from exactly, but he was a very wealthy and charismatic businessman who knew many ports and traveled often. The Spaniard was married in his country, but it is said that his wife was extremely ill and she could never have any children. The heartbreak of his dismal marriage situation led him to work hard to provide for her care. It was unbearable and lonely for him, so his travels gave him something to look forward to. During one of his trips to Cuba, he met Amaryllis. Amaryllis was a black Creole woman who made her living on the streets of Havana. She was well known, friendly, and uniquely beautiful. Her skin glistened even at night, and her hair was trimmed close to her head. Having a way with words and the way that she moved, the Spaniard was struck with such lovesickness that he returned to the island again and again. It got to the point that she would never entertain another caller, only the Spaniard. The Spaniard's wife continued to slip away by an illness that eventually killed her. He later received word of his wife's passing and went back to the small town off the Spanish coast, a place he kept very secret because of the pain it caused him. After putting his past and his household in order, he returned to Havana and took Amaryllis away with him. They traveled to Cayo Hueso, the island of bones. He had promised her time and time again that he would take her away from the streets and suitors. Because of her reputation, they would have to leave Cuba. The location had to have a little bit of nightlife, a small town, and of course, it had to be near the ocean. Amaryllis loved the sea, and she went there to pray and cry for the mistakes she had made and the life she had chosen for such a long time. She was finally deeply in love with a man, for once, and she would stop at nothing to follow and obey him. She would do everything she could to change her stars, and with God's and her Ochung's help, she knew she could. The Virgin of Charity, known as the Yoruba goddess Ochung, was her guardian saint. At an early age, Amaryllis's mother had dedicated her baby to this spiritual entity for protection and favor. She had always been taught to pay tribute and adore this entity, and the oracle had been consulted many times for reassurance that she would eventually leave Cuba by way of a rich foreign man who came through the sea. This man would secure her future and that of her children. The islanders in Key West would always welcome wealthy businessmen, and the Spaniard acquired a large two-story house near Olivia Street. Downstairs, he employed local laborers to build him a storefront that would sell his cigars and his liquor. Supplies for travelers could also be had, such as soap and other sundries. Once again, his golden touch made his local business flourish. The second floor of the wooden house was dedicated solely to the home he had made with Amaryllis, even though he told everyone she was his maid. Being wealthy, it wasn't questioned at first. In those days, near the turn of the century, it wasn't looked well upon for a couple of different skin colors to be together in a common law relationship or marriage. What's worse, the Ku Klux Klan was alive and well in Key West. They didn't like blacks. They didn't like Cubans. And if you weren't what they considered to be white, you didn't have any rights. Again, in their eyes. And if you were white and you had a black lover or spouse, you were considered the dregs of the earth. Of course, slavery had been abolished, but the hatred lived on. You can make changes, pass new laws, but the hearts of men are not always cleansed of the sin of hatred. Race wasn't the only thing that would cause rumors to run rampant on the island. If a woman had been a prostitute and then decided to change her lifestyle, repent of it, and become an honorable wife and mother, it would be extremely difficult to live down her past, especially if people on the island knew and decided she would never be free of such a reputation. She would always be considered one of those types of women, honorable church going folks, the type of people that usually rule society, would always remind women like that about their past, not always with words, but with attitudes and alienation. A woman like that could never be part of a church group or even a local society group. How could that sort of woman be trusted to live and participate in the community? How could her children be included and play with other children in the school playground or at Sunday school events? A common law marriage with a woman of a different skin color would never be accepted or even acknowledged. In Amaryllis's case, she had two strikes and more against her. She was black and she had been a prostitute. Additionally, she was considered to be a practitioner of the occult arts, voodoo, and spiritism. Considering all of these things, the Spaniard and his common law wife led a very lonely life. They were the topic of conversation, and the gossip grew and enveloped them in a hatred you could cut with a knife. As years went by, children with light brown skin emerged from the home when Amaryllis went shopping for meat, fish, and other household supplies. They had three children, two boys and one girl, and they did not dress like a poor maid's children. On Sundays, the Spaniard would give her a ride on his horse and carriage. Her children would laugh and play with him, and people began to talk. The Spaniard went around town inquiring about a possible tutor for the children. She did not want them to be illiterate like she was. There was talk that she was able to travel to Cuba often, and each time she came back with beautiful things, silk garments, and gold jewelry. Sometimes she would come downstairs, and some of the men would stare and make suggestive comments in hopes of having her for themselves. Not officially, of course, but in discretion, in secret. They would ask the Spaniard if they could pay for her to sleep with them. He would avoid these questions, yell at her, and tell her to go upstairs. Sometimes the look of desperation was so apparent, the men would joke with him and say, "What's wrong? She's only your maid." The young woman's only crime was the way she looked and the choices she had made in seeking a means to live and survive in the past. Amaryllis had changed her life and honored the Spaniard in every way. It sickened her that she was still some sort of commodity in the eyes of the men that desired her. All in all, the Spaniard traveled less and less, and eventually the children were sent back to Cuba to live with Amaryllis's family. It was too difficult for them on the island. A happy and carefree life for a child to live and go to school did not seem possible for these children, who were the product of an interracial union. Amaryllis stayed because everyone knew her in Havana, and her children would suffer at the hand and the commentaries of those who knew her. Additionally, she loved her man, but they were not lawfully wed. This was something she wanted with all of her heart, and so did he. They wondered how it could be. After all, it was close to the end of the last century, when a very brave man who had been elected as the first black judge in the post-Reconstruction South performed a marriage of an interracial couple, and subsequently he was formally removed from office. The judge did not win the fight to retain his position. It was a very tragic and sad ending for a man who believed in the right of men and women to marry despite the color of their skin. He died a pauper, and it destroyed him. The whole town knew it. The Spaniard and Amaryllis knew the general social repercussions. More importantly, what it would mean to their children. They could go to Spain, but that would mean travel and time away from each other. The Spaniard was getting older, and he could not stand the lifestyle and the stress of constant travel. There seemed to be no positive solution for their situation at the time. The hot breeze blew each day, and the humid, muggy air at night made it more difficult to sleep. The days were long, the nights longer, and time was just time. The people woke each day, washed, and went to work. A piping tin of Cuban coffee with evaporated or condensed milk sustained them and gave them the energy they needed for endless work days. Children without parents would work at the tobacco factories, at the small grocery stores, or even at the docks to make a small wage and survive any way they could. Amaryllis knew she was blessed and believed that her goddess had made it possible for her to at least live properly and enable her to go see and provide money to her babies in Cuba. It could have been worse, she thought. Sometimes her ancestral spirits would instruct her, and her belief in the occult arts was very strong. The people of Key West had little knowledge of those things in those days, and their way was to go and light a candle at St. Mary's Church. They would pray to St. Mary, St. Joseph, and kneel to the old statue of the baby Jesus, making their petitions known. The Virgin of Charity was acknowledged by the Catholic faith as a version of the Virgin Mary. Amaryllis believed many of the women of prayer at the Catholic Church would pray to see someone like her go back to Cuba, never to return with her dirty children, who were conceived in sin and bastards with no name. She wondered about sin, and there were other churches on the island where she would pass and hear singing. They were churches where blacks like her would go. But dare she go in and sit to listen to the angelic voices? Was she dirty there too? No one ever reached out to her, so she assumed she was not welcome. It was a very lonely life for her. The Spaniard was lonely too. He was a friendly and social man. He loved to entertain friends and have long talks over a wonderful dinner and a full-bodied cigar. The life became impossible for him because of his woman. There were no friends, no one to trust. She was too young, too beautiful. Very few women on the island were as appealing to the opposite sex. How could he entertain friends? The men wanted her, and the women hated her. The Spaniard knew that he was long in years, and his age showed as his spirit sank within him. He was depressed, and could no longer function as a husband should. This condition only made Amaryllis think he no longer loved her, and that he was growing increasingly ashamed of their life together. Unfortunately, she knew the way she had lived, and her former lifestyle was a threat to her life with the Spaniard and the horrible people that lived on this island. Cuba was such a happy place and prosperous. She dreamed of going off to the country and riding her horse with the Spaniard. They had had wonderful times there. They drank, they ate, and lived their love with so much intensity that she longed for those times. If they lived there together again, they could be with their children and give them the love they so longed to give them. My Cuba, she pondered tearfully. There, a woman could give herself to the man she loved, and nothing could be wrong. The island of Cuba was large, and they could live wherever they wanted to, and no one would have to know her past. Not only that, but she also had to support her elderly mother and her family. The Spaniard called Amaryllis from downstairs. Hey, Amaryllis, come here. I need you down here. Amaryllis hurried downstairs in response to his cry out to her. The Spaniard told her she had to clean up the store. He needed her help. Some of the kids from the neighborhood had been in the store and brought their muddy shoes with them. She agreed and began to clean up, sweeping the dirt outside and arranging the goods in the store. They were alone, and he saw the opportunity to speak with her. I love you, my darling. You know that, right? She again started to cry. She knew he loved her. But what could be done about this love? Love didn't seem to solve anything. The Spaniard continued and told her he loved her again, and that she had to believe that. Despite his love, he knew she wasn't happy, and neither was he. It was impossible. Worse yet, he felt that there might be danger. He realized and feared for her life more than his. The Spaniard knew he didn't have much time. He felt it in his body, in his head. If something were to happen to him, what would become of her? She had no right to anything on the property. Amaryllis heard him say the words she feared he would one day say. She would have to return to Cuba to be with the children. He would continue to care for her, and she could take whatever she wanted with her. The Spaniard purchased a house for her on the outskirts of Havana. It was a grand house with several bedrooms, and she would be safe there. He promised to visit often and send her the money she needed for herself and the children. Further, he had spoken to a Cuban doctor who was visiting Key West, and the doctor knew of a good private school where their kids could go. Everything was set. He just needed her to agree, and he fashioned the explanation of his plan as gently as he could. Amaryllis dropped the broom and ran upstairs to her bedroom. She cried for what seemed like days until her swollen eyelids forced her to sleep. That night he came to her and held her in his arms, and he wept bitterly. There was no other way for them. Again he told her of his love for her, and that love had to be unselfish. Keeping her with him could only end tragically for her, and he could not live with that. Amaryllis kissed his mouth tenderly and whispered that she loved him too, and that she was not afraid to stay. He would have to be the one to send her away. If she left, it would be because he wanted it that way. They fell asleep together. The morning came, and soon the preparations were underway. Their choice was inevitable. The Spaniard took down several large trunks he had used in his travels for his wife to use. Yes, his wife. She was his wife, his friend, and the meaning of life for him. He stumbled over the trunk, sat and buried his head in his large hands in anguish. She could not see him this way. Upstairs, Amaryllis looked through her things. They seemed so meaningless. She knew that she had to take what she could, and she knew that as long as he could, the Spaniard would provide for her. It was hard for her to focus and to believe she was really leaving. That same afternoon, she boarded the ferry that took her to Havana. She knew it was the last time she would see him. There are times in life when you find someone you love more than life itself. Mostly, those types of love come with an expensive price tag and extreme consequences. You can have everything and nothing at the same time. Many times you wonder why you were born, why you love, why do you have to suffer, and why do beautiful things end? It means nothing. The color of one's skin or where they are from. Even in what seems like perfection, there is mishap and failure. But mostly, there is pain in the longing for that one love that can change everything. Now, back in Cuba, Amaryllis questioned herself in silence. Was it worth it to love a man that could never, ever truly be hers? She knew their bond was stronger than most marriages, and yet it was cheapened by the opinions of many that perhaps had never had the opportunity to love that way. It was sad, very sad. She glanced over at the statue she prayed to, a hard plaster version of a beautiful virgin appearing to three desperate men who were in peril on the sea. There was such emptiness in the image that sat on her dresser. The statue wasn't God. It felt nothing. It heard nothing. It spoke nothing. And it gave nothing. The image stood there, a stone figure with a painted face. It couldn't hold her and give her comfort. She realized only a good God and the man he had given to her could do that. She looked out of her balcony and saw the countryside where her home was away from the city of Havana. She felt a change of heart. For the first time, she believed and wanted to go after that change. She would find a nice church to learn about the new spirit that lived within her, and she would teach that to her children, and they would carry on, remembering their father. She laid down and stared at the ceiling, remembering the Spaniard and how difficult yet beautiful her life had been with him. Instead of sadness, she had a sincere hope for a future without him.